Elena didn't know that the man standing in the shadows at the back of the auction house was the Alpha King of the Northern Territory. She didn't know that his amber eyes had been watching her since the moment she stepped onto the platform, and she certainly didn't know that the steady warmth radiating from his direction would soon become the only thing keeping her anchored to sanity. All she knew was shame. The rough wooden platform beneath her bare feet felt like a stage for her humiliation. The borrowed dress, if it could even be called that, hung loose around her thin frame, the faded blue fabric doing little to hide the bruises that painted her arms in shades of purple and yellow. Her father's parting gift before he'd sold her to cover his gambling debts. "Look at this one, gentlemen," the auctioneer called out, his voice carrying across the crowded room like oil over water. Fresh from the outer districts, young, trainable, and desperate enough to be grateful for any kindness shown. Laughter rippled through the crowd of men gathered below. Elena's hands trembled as she forced herself to keep her chin up, to meet their hungry gazes with what little defiance she had left. Every instinct she had developed over the past 3 years screamed at her to run, but there was nowhere to go. The debt collectors flanking the platform made sure of that. "What's the opening bid?" someone shouted from the middle of the crowd. 50 silver pieces, the auctioneer announced. "Do I hear 50? Elena's stomach twisted. 50 pieces of silver, that's what her life was worth now, less than what her father owed for a single night at the gambling tables. "For 50, called out a burly man near the front, his beard stained with ale and his eyes lingering on Elena's legs in a way that made her skin crawl. 60, another voice joined in. The bidding continued, each number climbing higher, while Elena stood frozen on the platform. She tried to disappear into herself, to go to that quiet place in her mind where the voices couldn't reach her. It was a trick she'd learned during the worst nights with her father's creditors, when they'd taken their frustrations out on her because he wasn't there to face them himself. 120, 140. The numbers kept rising, but Elena barely heard them any more. Something was wrong. The energy in the room had shifted, grown tense and electric. She lifted her head and immediately understood why. A man had appeared at the back of the auction house, standing in the shadows near the door. Even from a distance, everything about him commanded attention. His black coat was clearly expensive, tailored to perfection across shoulders that spoke of real strength rather than the soft corruption of wealth. His dark hair was swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble, all sharp angles and aristocratic lines that suggested both beauty and danger in equal measure. But it was his eyes that made Elena's breath catch in her throat, amber, like liquid gold in firelight, and fixed on her with an intensity that made something deep in her chest pull tight. The crowd had noticed him too. Conversations died mid-sentence as heads turned. The burly man who'd been bidding aggressively suddenly seemed very interested in examining his boots. "Do I hear 160? The auctioneer called out, but his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Silence. The stranger stepped forward, and Elena could swear she felt the movement like a physical thing, as if an invisible cord connected them and had just gone taut. His footsteps echoed in the suddenly quiet room as he moved through the crowd, men stepping aside without even seeming to realize they were doing it. He stopped directly in front of the platform and looked up at Elena. When their eyes met, something impossible happened. Heat shot up her spine, spreading through her chest and settling somewhere behind her sternum like a second heartbeat. For a moment, the shame and fear that had been her constant companions for months simply disappeared, replaced by something she couldn't name but desperately wanted to understand. 2,000 gold pieces, the stranger said quietly. The words landed like a physical blow. Eleanor felt her knees go weak. 2,000 gold pieces was more money than most people saw in a lifetime. It was certainly more than her father's debts, more than anything she could have imagined. The auctioneer's mouth fell open. Did you say 2,000 gold pieces? I did. The stranger's voice was steady, cultured, with an edge of authority that brooked no argument. Do you have any other bidders? Elena looked out at the crowd and saw nothing but shocked faces and shaking heads. Who could possibly compete with a sum like that? Who would even want to? "Sold!" the auctioneer called out, his voice cracking slightly on the word. "To the gentleman in black." Elena's legs finally gave out. She sank to her knees on the platform, the full weight of what had just happened crashing over her. She'd been sold, actually sold, like a piece of livestock or a broken piece of furniture, and the man who'd bought her had paid enough money to buy a small estate. What did that mean for her? The debt collectors were already moving, climbing onto the platform to escort her down. Elena forced herself to stand, even though her whole body was shaking. She wouldn't give these men the satisfaction of seeing her carried away. The stranger was waiting at the bottom of the platform steps. Up close, he was even more imposing, easily 6.5 feet tall, with the kind of presence that made the air around him seem charged with electricity. But when Elena stumbled on the last step and his hand shot out to steady her, his touch was gentle. The moment his fingers wrapped around her wrist, that impossible warmth flared again, stronger this time, like liquid sunlight flowing through her veins. Elena gasped, her eyes flying to his face. He felt it too. She could see it in the way his pupils dilated, in the slight tightening around his eyes. "Steady," he murmured, and his voice was different now, softer, almost protective. "You're safe now." Safe. The word hit Eleanor harder than any blow ever had. When was the last time she'd been safe? When was the last time anyone had even cared enough to lie to her about it? "I don't understand," she whispered, looking up into those impossible amber eyes. Why did you—" "Because you needed someone too," he said simply. "And I needed—well, that's a conversation for later." He glanced around the auction house, which was slowly returning to its normal chaos as other lots were brought forward. "Right now we need to leave. Are you ready?" Elena stared at him. Ready? Ready for what? To go with a complete stranger who'd just paid a fortune for the privilege of owning her. To trust someone when trust had only ever led to more pain. But what choice did she have? The debt collectors were already walking away, their business concluded. Her father was long gone, probably halfway to the next territory by now, and this man, dangerous as he clearly was, had just saved her from a fate that would have been worse than death. Something in her chest pulled tight again, that strange warmth spreading further through her body. It felt like recognition, like coming home after a long journey, which was impossible. She'd never seen this man before in her life. "I'm ready," she heard herself say, and was surprised to find that she meant it. He nodded once and offered her his arm. Eleanor hesitated for just a moment before accepting it, her fingers trembling as they curved around the expensive fabric of his coat. The warmth intensified at the contact, and she could swear she heard him draw in a sharp breath. "Good," he said quietly, and began to lead her toward the door. "Then let's go home." Home, another word that hit her like a physical blow. Eleanor had almost forgotten what that word meant. As they walked through the crowd toward the exit, Elena caught fragments of whispered conversations. "Who is he?" "Never seen him before." "That kind of money." "She must be special." Special. Elena almost laughed at that. If they only knew. If they knew what she really was, what had been done to her, they'd understand that there was nothing special about her at all. She was broken, used, worthless. But the man beside her didn't seem to see her that way. He'd paid a fortune for her, yes, but the way he held her arm was careful, respectful, like she was something precious rather than something purchased. They reached the door and stepped out into the cool night air. A carriage waited in the street, black and elegant, with horses that stamped restlessly in their traces. Everything about it spoke of wealth and power, confirming Elena's growing suspicion that she'd just been bought by someone far more important than a simple merchant or tradesman. "Before we go any further," he said, turning to face her in the amber glow of the streetlight, "I want you to know that you have choices. I know this situation isn't ideal, and I know you have no reason to trust me, but I'm not going to hurt you, Elena. I give you my word." Elena stared up at him, trying to process the sincerity in his voice. "You know my name." A ghost of a smile crossed his lips. "I make it my business to know things, especially when they matter." "And I matter?" The smile faded, replaced by something intense and almost desperate. "More than you could possibly understand." Before Elena could ask what that meant, he was helping her into the carriage. The interior was just as luxurious as she'd expected. Soft leather seats and polished wood, a small lantern casting warm light across surfaces that probably cost more than everything she'd ever owned combined. The stranger settled across from her, and Eleanor found herself studying his face in the lamplight. He was younger than she'd first thought, maybe early 30s, with the kind of masculine beauty that belonged in old paintings of kings and warriors. There was something familiar about him, though she was certain they'd never met. "What happens now?" she asked quietly as the carriage began to move. "Now," he said, leaning back against the seat, "you rest. Tomorrow we'll talk. You'll have questions and I'll answer them as best I can. But tonight you just need to know that you're safe." There was that word again. Safe. Elena wanted to believe it more than she wanted her next breath, but 3 years of surviving on the streets had taught her that safety was an illusion, something that could be stripped away without warning, leaving you worse off than before. Still, as the carriage rolled through the night toward an unknown destination, Eleanor found herself relaxing despite her better judgment. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe it was shock, or maybe it was the way the stranger kept watching her with those amber eyes, like she was a mystery he was determined to solve. Whatever it was, for the first time in months, Eleanor allowed herself to hope that tomorrow might be different than today. That maybe, just maybe, her life was about to change. She had no idea how right she was. The journey to his estate took 2 hours, and with every mile that passed, Elena's unease grew exponentially. It started with small things. The way other travellers on the road stepped aside when they saw the carriage approaching, some even bowing their heads in deference. The quality of the horses pulling them, magnificent beasts that moved with the fluid grace of thoroughbreds worth more than most people's homes. The way her mysterious buyer carried himself, even in the confines of the carriage, with an unconscious authority that spoke of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. But it was the gates that truly made Elena's blood run cold. Massive iron structures that towered at least 20 feet high, adorned with intricate metalwork depicting wolves in various poses, hunting, running, howling at a crescent moon. Guards flanked the entrance, and when they saw the carriage approaching, they snapped to attention with military precision. "Welcome home, Your Majesty!" one of them called out as the gates swung open. Elena's heart stopped. "Your Majesty!" She turned to stare at the man sitting across from her, her mind reeling. "Your Majesty," she whispered, the words feeling foreign and impossible on her tongue. He met her gaze steadily, and she could see something that might have been regret flickering in those amber eyes. "That's a conversation we'll have inside," he said quietly. "I promise you'll have answers soon." The estate beyond the gates was like something out of a fairy tale. Rolling gardens stretched as far as Elena could see, perfectly manicured and dotted with fountains that caught the moonlight like scattered diamonds. The mansion itself rose from the landscape like a monument to power and wealth, 3 stories of pristine stone and countless windows that gleamed in the darkness. Elena had grown up in a 2-room shack on the outskirts of the outer districts. She spent the last 3 years sleeping in alleyways and abandoned buildings. The sheer scale of this place made her feel impossibly small and out of place. The carriage rolled to a stop in front of the main entrance, where a small army of servants had already gathered. Elena watched through the window as they arranged themselves in perfect lines, waiting. All of them were impeccably dressed, and all of them radiated the same sense of barely contained power that she'd noticed in the guards at the gate. Elena! The sound of her name drew her attention back to her companion. I know this is overwhelming. I know you have questions and fears, and you have every right to both, but I need you to trust me for just a little while longer. Can you do that? Trust. Such a simple word for something that felt impossible. Elena studied his face, searching for any sign of deception or cruelty. Instead, she found only patience and something that looked disturbingly like genuine concern. I don't have much choice, do I? She said finally. Something painful flickered across his features. You always have choices, Elena. Always. That's something I hope you'll come to understand. Before she could ask what that meant, the carriage door was opening and he was stepping out. Elena heard the collective intake of breath from the assembled servants, followed by a series of respectful murmurs. Your Majesty. Welcome home, sire. We've prepared everything as you requested. A tall, elegant woman approached the carriage, her silver hair swept back in an immaculate bun and her dark eyes sharp with intelligence. When she spoke, her voice carried the crisp efficiency of someone accustomed to managing important affairs. Your Majesty, I trust the journey was uneventful. The blue suite has been prepared as requested, and cook has kept dinner warm. Thank you, Mrs. Harrison, he replied, and Eleanor was struck again by the easy authority in his voice. This was a man who was used to being served, used to having his every need anticipated. Has Dr. Chen arrived? She's waiting in the East Wing, sire. Good. Please have her examine our guest when she's settled. He turned back to the carriage and extended his hand to Elena. Come, let me show you to your room. Elena stared at his outstretched hand, her mind still reeling from the impossible reality of her situation. She'd been bought by royalty, actual royalty, the kind of person who had doctors on standby and servants who jumped at his slightest word. What did he want with someone like her? She took his hand because she didn't know what else to do, and that now familiar warmth shot up her arm the moment their skin touched. If anything, the sensation was stronger now, more insistent, like her body was trying to tell her something important that her mind wasn't ready to accept. The interior of the mansion was even more intimidating than the exterior. Marble floors stretched in every direction, covered with rugs that probably cost more than Eleanor had ever seen in her lifetime. Portraits of stern-faced men and elegant women lined the walls, their painted eyes seeming to follow Eleanor as she passed. Everything gleamed with the kind of cleanliness and care that spoke of unlimited resources and meticulous attention to detail. This way, her mysterious benefactor said, guiding her toward a grand staircase that curved upward like something from a palace. Mrs. Harrison, please have dinner sent to the blue suite in an hour. Something simple, soup, bread, perhaps some fruit. Of course, Your Majesty. They climbed the stairs in silence, Eleanor acutely aware of the servants watching their progress. She could feel their curious gazes, could almost hear their thoughts. What was someone like her doing here? What did their king want with a broken girl from the outer districts? The blue suite, when they reached it, was larger than the entire building Elena had grown up in. The sitting room alone could have housed a family of 6 comfortably, with its plush furniture and enormous fireplace where logs crackled warmly. Through an open doorway she could see a bedroom dominated by a 4-poster bed that looked like it belonged in a museum. The bathroom is through there, he said, nodding toward another door. You'll find everything you need. Mrs. Harrison had some clothes brought up. I hope they fit reasonably well. He paused, running a hand through his dark hair in what seemed like the first genuinely nervous gesture Eleanor had seen from him. Elena, I know you must be frightened. I know this situation isn't what you expected, but I want you to know that you're safe here, truly safe. No one will hurt you, and no one will force you to do anything you don't want to do. Elena stared at him, trying to process the sincerity in his voice. Why? She whispered. Why would you pay so much for me just to give me a room like this and promise I'm safe? I don't understand." For a long moment he didn't answer. Then he moved to the window, staring out at the moonlit gardens below. "My sister was sold at an auction much like the one where I found you," he said quietly. "She was 16, beautiful, innocent, terrified. I was too young then to stop it, too powerless to save her." Elena's breath caught. What happened to her? "She died 3 months later. The man who bought her—" His hands clenched into fists at his sides. He was not kind. By the time I had enough power to find her, it was too late. The pain in his voice was raw, genuine. Elena found herself taking a step toward him without even realizing it. "I'm sorry," she said softly. He turned back to her, and the grief in his amber eyes made her chest ache. "I swore that night that I would never let it happen again, that if I ever had the chance to save someone from that fate, I would take it, no matter the cost." "So you saved me because I reminded you of your sister?" "No." The word was firm, immediate. "I saved you because you're you, Elena. Because when I saw you standing on that platform, something in my chest recognized something in yours. Because—" He stopped, shaking his head. "Because you deserve to be saved." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. Deserved to be saved. When was the last time anyone had thought she deserved anything good? When was the last time she thought it herself? "I still don't understand who you are," she said, because it was easier than examining the strange warmth spreading through her chest at his words. "Mrs. Harrison called you your Majesty. You live in a palace, but you never told me your name." A small smile crossed his lips. "You're right, I've been rude." He moved closer, stopping just far enough away that she didn't feel trapped, but close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his amber eyes. "My name is Kieran Thorne. I'm the Alpha King of the Northern Territory." Eleanor's knees went weak. The Alpha King. She'd heard stories, of course. Everyone had. Tales of the most powerful shifter in the northern lands, a man who commanded absolute loyalty from dozens of packs and whose word was law across thousands of square miles. He was supposed to be dangerous, ruthless, the kind of person ordinary mortals whispered about in fearful tones. He was also supposed to be a myth. "That's impossible," she breathed. "The Alpha King is just a story, a legend." Kieran's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed just slightly too sharp. "I assure you, I'm very real." Eleanor's survival instincts, honed by years of danger, suddenly screamed at her to run. This man, this creature, was the most powerful predator in the territory. He could crush her with one hand, could command armies with a word. Every rational thought in her head told her to get as far away from him as possible. But that strange warmth in her chest pulsed stronger, and instead of stepping back, she found herself rooted to the spot. "Why?" she asked again. "Why would the Alpha King buy a worthless girl at a slave auction?" The amusement disappeared from Kieran's face, replaced by something fierce and almost angry. "You are not worthless," he said, and there was a growl underneath his words that made Eleanor's skin prickle with awareness. "Don't ever say that about yourself again." "But I am," Elena protested, confusion making her voice sharper than she'd intended. "I'm nobody, nothing, a broken girl with no family, no money, no value to anyone. You could have any woman you wanted. Why would you waste time on someone like me?" Kieran moved so quickly that Elena didn't have time to react. One moment he was standing near the window, the next he was directly in front of her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. His eyes had shifted, becoming more gold than amber, and when he spoke, his voice carried an edge of supernatural command that made her wolf instincts she'd tried to suppress for years, sit up and take notice. "You are not nothing," he said, each word deliberate and weighted. "You survived 3 years on the streets. You endured abuse that would have broken most people. You stood on that platform tonight with your head high, despite everything they put you through. That doesn't make you worthless, Elena. That makes you extraordinary." Elena stared up at him, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. No one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever looked at her the way he was looking at her now, like she was precious, like she mattered. "I don't understand you," she whispered. "You will," he said softly. "Given time, you will." Slowly, carefully, as if she were a wild animal that might bolt at any moment, Kieran raised his hand toward her face. Elena knew she should step back, should put distance between them, but something about the gentleness in his movements, the patience in his expression, kept her frozen in place. When his fingertips touched her cheek, Eleanor's entire world shifted. The warmth that had been flickering between them since their first contact exploded into something overwhelming, something that felt like coming home and catching fire at the same time. She gasped, her eyes flying wide, and saw her shock mirrored in his face. "What is that?" she breathed. "Something I'll explain when you're ready to hear it," Kieran said, but his voice was rougher now, affected. "For now, just know that you're safe here, Eleanor. Whatever else happens, whatever else you decide, you're under my protection, and I protect what's mine." Mine. The word should have terrified her, should have sent her running for the door. Instead, it settled into her chest like a missing puzzle piece finally finding its place. Elena didn't understand what was happening to her, didn't understand the warmth or the way her body seemed to recognize this dangerous, powerful man. But for the first time in years, she felt something other than fear when someone touched her. She felt like she might actually be safe. The days that followed were the strangest of Elena's life. She woke each morning in the impossibly soft bed, surrounded by luxury that still felt like a dream she might be jolted out of at any moment. The blue suite had become her sanctuary, but Kieran had made it clear that she wasn't a prisoner. The mansion was hers to explore, the gardens were open to her, and the staff had been instructed to treat her as an honoured guest rather than a curiosity. It was the small things that slowly began to crack the walls around her heart. The way Kieran knocked softly on her door each morning and waited for permission before entering, even though this was his house and he could have commanded anything. The way he always asked what she wanted for breakfast instead of simply deciding for her. The way he never stood too close or moved too quickly, as if he understood instinctively that sudden movement still made her flinch. They fell into a routine that felt surprisingly natural. Breakfast together in the small dining room adjacent to her suite, where Eleanor gradually learned to trust that there would always be enough food, that no one was going to take it away from her. Then Kieran would retreat to his study to handle the endless business of ruling, while Eleanor explored the vast library or wandered the gardens under the watchful but discreet eyes of the household staff. Lunch was often served in the study, where Eleanor would curl up in the enormous leather chair by the window with a book while Kieran worked at his desk. She'd stolen glances at him during those quiet hours, studying the way his dark hair fell across his forehead when he concentrated, the way his hands moved with decisive precision as he signed documents and wrote letters. He was beautiful, she realized one afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the tall windows and caught the gold threads in his amber eyes. Beautiful in a way that seemed almost otherworldly, all sharp angles and masculine grace. But it was more than that. It was the way he spoke to his advisers with firm respect, never raising his voice but commanding absolute attention. The way he asked detailed questions about crop yields and trade routes, genuinely caring about the well-being of people he'd never met. This was what a real leader looked like. Not the corrupt officials and petty tyrants Elena had grown up fearing, but someone who understood that power was meant to protect, not destroy. "You're staring," Kieran said quietly one afternoon, not looking up from the letter he was writing. Eleanor felt heat flood her cheeks. "I'm sorry, I was just thinking." "About what?" He set down his pen and turned to face her, giving her his full attention in that way that always made her feel like the most important person in his world. Elena hesitated. 3 weeks ago, she would never have dared to speak so openly to someone in his position. But something about the way he looked at her, the patience he showed, made her feel brave enough to be honest. "About how different you are from what I expected," she said finally. "When I was growing up, the people in power were cruel. They took what they wanted and hurt anyone who got in their way. But you're not like that." Something painful flickered across Kieran's features. "Power corrupts, Elena. I've seen it happen to good people, and I've had to make difficult choices to prevent it from happening to others. I'm not always kind." "But you choose to be when you can," Elena said. "That matters." Kieran was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Tell me about your dreams," he said suddenly. "My dreams?" "Before everything went wrong, before your father's debts and the auction, what did you want from life?" Eleanor looked down at her hands, remembering. "I wanted to be a teacher," she said softly. "In the outer districts, most children never learn to read properly. I thought if I could change that for even a few of them, it would matter." She laughed, but there was no humour in it. "Stupid, I know. Girls like me don't become teachers." "Why not?" Kieran's voice carried an edge that made Elena look up. "You're intelligent, compassionate, and you understand what it means to struggle. Those are exactly the qualities that make a good teacher." "Because I'm nobody," Elena said automatically. "Because I don't have the right family or the right connections or—" "Elena." Kieran rose from his desk and moved to kneel beside her chair, bringing them to eye level. "You keep saying you're nobody, but that's not what I see when I look at you. I see a woman who survived when others would have broken. I see someone who still has dreams despite everything that's been taken from her. That's not nobody. That's extraordinary." The warmth of his presence, the sincerity in his amber eyes, made something flutter dangerously in Elena's chest. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that she could be more than just a victim of circumstances. But years of being told she was worthless didn't disappear overnight. "You see what you want to see," she whispered. "But the truth is, I'm damaged goods, used up. No matter how kind you are to me, that doesn't change." Kieran's eyes flashed, and for a moment Eleanor caught a glimpse of the predator beneath the gentleman's facade. "Who told you that?" he asked, his voice dangerously soft. "Who made you believe such a vicious lie?" Elena flinched at the intensity in his voice. "It's not a lie. It's just what I am." "No." The word was a growl. "What you are is a survivor. What you are is someone precious enough that I'd burn down the world to keep you safe. Don't you dare let the bastards who hurt you define your worth." Before Elena could respond, a sharp knock echoed through the study. Kieran's expression shifted instantly, becoming alert and focused in a way that reminded Elena exactly who she was dealing with. "Enter!" he called, rising to his feet. Marcus, Kieran's head of security, stepped into the room. Elena had met him briefly during her first week at the estate. A tall, intimidating man with silver-streaked hair and eyes like winter storms. He moved with the controlled grace of a career soldier, and his presence always made Elena feel like trouble was close behind. "Your Majesty," Marcus said, his voice tight with barely controlled tension. "We have a problem. 3 men arrived at the gates an hour ago, claiming to have legal documents that prove Elena was sold under fraudulent circumstances. They're demanding her immediate return." Elena's blood turned to ice. She knew without asking who those men were. Viktor Romanov and his associates, the loan sharks who had held her father's debts, who had arranged the auction in the first place. Men who took what they wanted and eliminated anyone who stood in their way. "What kind of documents?" Kieran asked, his voice deadly calm. "Forged, most likely," Marcus replied, "but professionally done. They're claiming Elena's father had no right to sell her because she was already contracted to pay off his debts through other means." Elena shot to her feet, panic clawing at her throat. "This is my fault," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. They must have found out you bought me. Victor doesn't like losing assets, and he—" She stopped, seeing the way both men were looking at her. "I have to go with them. If I don't, they'll make trouble for you, and I won't let that happen." The silence that followed was deafening. "Elena," Kieran said, his voice so soft it was barely audible. "Look at me." She forced herself to meet his gaze, expecting to see anger or disappointment. Instead, she found something that looked like heartbreak. "Do you truly believe I would hand you over to men who want to hurt you?" he asked. "It's not about what you want," Elena said desperately. "Victor has resources, connections. He can make legal troubles for you, turn people against you. I'm not worth that kind of risk." "You're wrong." Kieran moved closer, close enough that Elena could feel the heat radiating from his skin. "You're worth everything, Elena, and I don't give up what's mine." There was that word again. Mine. It should have terrified her, should have triggered every survival instinct she'd developed. Instead, it made something warm and desperate unfurl in her chest. "Marcus," Kieran continued without taking his eyes off Elena, "double the guard rotations, post men at every entrance to the estate. If these men try to set foot on my land without permission, they are to be treated as hostile intruders." "Already done, Your Majesty," Marcus replied with what might have been satisfaction. "I also took the liberty of having our legal team examine their documents. As suspected, the forgeries are good, but not perfect. We'll have no trouble discrediting them if it comes to that." Elena stared between the two men, hardly able to process what she was hearing. "You're going to fight them? For me?" "Elena." Kieran reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. When she didn't, his hands framed her face with infinite gentleness. "I told you that you're under my protection. I meant it. No one is taking you anywhere you don't want to go." "But I'm nobody," Elena whispered, even as she found herself leaning into his touch. "I'm just some broken girl you bought at an auction. Why would you risk anything for me?" Kieran's thumbs brushed across her cheekbones, and Eleanor felt that impossible warmth flare between them again. Stronger this time, more insistent, as if her body was trying to tell her something her mind wasn't ready to accept. "Because you're mine," he said simply. "Because the moment I saw you on that platform, something in me recognized something in you. Because when I touch you like this, you feel it too." Elena's breath caught. She did feel it. That strange pull, that sense of rightness that made no logical sense. "What is it?" she whispered. "Something I'll explain when you're ready," Kieran said. "But first, you need to make a choice. You can run, try to disappear before Victor and his men find you, or you can stay, trust that I'm strong enough to protect what matters to me." Elena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Running was what she'd always done when trouble found her. It was safe, familiar, the survival strategy that had kept her alive for 3 years on the streets. But staying meant trusting someone else with her safety. It meant believing that she was worth protecting, worth fighting for. It meant accepting that maybe, just maybe, she could have something good in her life without it being ripped away. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I know," Kieran murmured, "but you don't have to be scared alone anymore." Eleanor opened her eyes and found herself drowning in liquid gold. This close, she could see the flecks of amber and bronze that made his eyes seem almost luminous. She could smell his scent, something wild and masculine that made her wolf instincts hum with recognition. "If I stay," she said quietly, "and this goes badly, if people get hurt because of me—" "Then we'll face it together," Kieran interrupted. "But Elena, I need you to understand something. This isn't charity. This isn't just me protecting someone weaker. When I look at you, I see my equal. I see someone strong enough to stand beside me, not behind me. Equal." The word hit Elena like a lightning bolt. No one had ever seen her as equal to anything, much less to the most powerful man in the territory. "I don't know how to be that," she whispered. "Then let me teach you," Kieran said, and his voice carried a promise that made Elena's heart race. "Let me show you what you're truly capable of." Before Elena could lose her nerve, before the fear could creep back in and convince her to run, she rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. It was meant to be a simple kiss, a gesture of trust and acceptance. But the moment their mouths touched, that warmth that had been building between them exploded into something overwhelming. Elena gasped against his lips. A sensation crashed through her, heat and recognition, and a desperate sense of coming home that made no logical sense, but felt more real than anything she'd ever experienced. Kieran groaned softly, his arms coming around her waist to pull her closer. The kiss deepened, became something urgent and claiming that spoke of patience finally rewarded and restraint finally broken. Eleanor felt herself melting into him, felt every wall she'd built around her heart crumbling like paper. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Elena found herself staring up into eyes that seemed to glow with an inner light. "I'll stay," she whispered against his lips. "Whatever happens, I'll stay." Kieran's smile was devastating, full of triumph and something that looked dangerously like love. "Then we'll face tomorrow together," he said. "And Elena, Victor Romanov is about to learn exactly what happens to people who try to take what belongs to me." Elena had exactly 6 hours to enjoy the feeling of safety before Victor Romanov destroyed it. She was in the gardens when it happened, sitting beneath an ancient oak tree with a book of poetry in her lap, trying to memorize the way the afternoon sunlight filtered through the leaves. After years of never knowing if she'd have a safe place to sleep, she'd learned to treasure moments of peace when they came. Marcus appeared at her side like a shadow, his expression grim. "Miss Eleanor, you need to come with me, now." The urgency in his voice made Eleanor's blood run cold. "What's wrong?" "Victor Romanov and his associates have taken their business public," Marcus said, already guiding her toward the main house. "They're in the town square with a crowd, making accusations about His Majesty's illegal acquisition of you. It's becoming a spectacle." Eleanor's stomach dropped. She'd hoped Victor would accept Kieran's refusal and retreat to find easier prey. She should have known better. Men like Victor didn't accept defeat gracefully, especially not when it came from someone they perceived as having stolen their property. "Where's Kieran?" she asked as they hurried through the mansion's halls. "On his way," Marcus replied. "But Elena, you should know, they're not just questioning the legality of the purchase, they're making personal claims about you, ugly ones." Elena's steps faltered. She knew exactly what kind of claims Victor would make. The truth was ugly enough. What had been done to her in the months before the auction, the ways she'd been broken and used. In Victor's hands, those truths would become weapons designed to humiliate her and discredit Kieran. "I need to get out of here," she said suddenly, stopping in the middle of the hallway. "If I'm not here, if I just disappear—" "No." Marcus's voice was firm, final. His Majesty's orders were explicit. You stay safe, you stay protected, and you stay where you belong. He'll handle Victor Romanov. 15 minutes later, Elena found herself in a carriage racing toward the town centre, flanked by guards who looked like they were carved from stone. Marcus had insisted she needed to be present for Kieran's response, that running would only confirm Victor's accusations and make her look guilty of whatever crimes he was inventing. Elena understood the logic, but that didn't make the terror churning in her stomach any easier to bear. The town square was packed with people when they arrived. Word of the confrontation had spread quickly, and it seemed like half the territory had come to witness the spectacle. Elena could hear Victor's voice booming across the crowd before she could see him, each word designed to carry maximum impact. "All stolen from her rightful owners through fraud and deception. This so-called Alpha King thinks he can buy whatever he wants, even damaged goods that don't belong to him." Elena flinched at the phrase damaged goods. It was exactly what she'd expected, but hearing it shouted for hundreds of people to witness made her feel sick. Marcus helped her from the carriage, positioning himself and the other guards to form a protective barrier around her. Eleanor could feel the weight of dozens of stares, could hear the whispers already starting to spread through the crowd. "There she is," someone called out. "The girl they're fighting over." Victor stood on the steps of the town hall, flanked by 3 men who looked like they'd been hired for their ability to intimidate. He was exactly as Elena remembered, tall and lean, with silver hair and cold eyes that missed nothing. He'd always been handsome in a predatory way, like a snake that had learned to smile. When he spotted Elena in the crowd, his grin turned triumphant. "Ah, and here's our little lost lamb now," he called out, his voice carrying easily across the square. "Come to witness the truth being told at last." Elena's hands trembled as every eye in the square turned toward her. She wanted to disappear, wanted to sink into the ground and vanish. But Marcus's steady presence at her side kept her upright. "Tell them, Elena," Victor continued, his voice taking on a mock-gentle tone that made her skin crawl. "Tell them what you really are. Tell them about the men who used you, about the ways you've been broken. Tell them why you're worthless, damaged goods that this fool king was tricked into purchasing." The words hit Elena like physical blows. Every ugly truth about her past, every moment of violation and helplessness was being laid bare for the entertainment of strangers. She could feel herself fracturing, could feel the walls she'd built around her heart crumbling under the weight of public humiliation. "Tell them about the baby you lost," Victor called out, and Elena's world went white around the edges. "Tell them about how you spread your legs for anyone who offered you a meal, and how even that couldn't save you from ending up on an auction block where you belong." Elena couldn't breathe. The crowd was murmuring now, some with pity, others with disgust. She could hear fragments of conversation, judgments being passed by people who knew nothing about her except what Victor chose to reveal. "Damaged goods," someone whispered. "No wonder the Alpha King wants to return her." "She's nothing but a used-up whore," another voice added. What was he thinking? Elena's legs gave out. She would have collapsed right there in the square if Marcus hadn't caught her, his strong hands keeping her upright even as her world shattered around her. This was why she'd wanted to run. This was why she'd tried to leave before Victor could find her. Because deep down she'd known this moment would come, the moment when everyone would see her for what she really was. Nothing, nobody, damaged beyond repair. "Elena." Marcus's voice was low, urgent. "Look." Elena forced herself to lift her head, and her heart stopped. Kieran was standing at the edge of the square. He wasn't alone. At least a dozen men flanked him, all of them moving with the fluid grace that marked them as shifters. But it was Kieran himself who commanded attention. Even from a distance, Elena could feel the power radiating from him like heat from a forge. His amber eyes had gone full gold, and when he smiled, she could see the sharp canines that marked him as an apex predator. This was the Alpha King in truth. Not the gentle, patient man who'd held her while she cried, but the creature who ruled through strength and fear, the man who could kill without hesitation and sleep peacefully afterward. Elena should have been terrified. Every survival instinct she possessed should have been screaming at her to run from something so dangerous. Instead, she felt a fierce, primal satisfaction watching him move through the crowd like death-given form. Victor seemed to realise his mistake the moment Kieran appeared. The confidence drained from his face, replaced by the kind of fear that came from suddenly understanding you'd vastly underestimated your opponent. "Your Majesty," Victor called out, trying to regain control of the narrative. "How good of you to join us. I trust you've heard the truth about your acquisition. Surely you'll want to return damaged merchandise and get your money back." Kieran continued walking until he reached the centre of the square. When he spoke, his voice carried easily across the crowd, rich and commanding and absolutely deadly. "Viktor Romanov," he said, and even those 2 words were enough to make several people in the crowd take involuntary steps backward. "You seem to be under the impression that you have some claim to what's mine." "Your Majesty, surely you must understand," Victor tried again, but there was sweat beading on his forehead now. The girl is damaged, used, worthless, no fit mate for a king. Worthless? Kieran's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but somehow everyone in the square heard it clearly. Let me tell you what I see when I look at Elena. He turned, his golden eyes finding hers across the crowd, and Elena felt that familiar warmth flare between them. Stronger now, more insistent, as if the mate bond was responding to the threat against her. I see a woman who survived 3 years on the streets when others would have died in 3 days, Kieran continued, his voice gaining power with each word. I see someone who endured unspeakable cruelty and still maintained her capacity for kindness. I see a survivor, a fighter, someone strong enough to stand beside an Alpha King as his equal. Elena's breath caught. He was defending her, publicly, powerfully, in front of hundreds of witnesses. I see my mate, Kieran said, and the words rang across the square like a bell. Chosen by fate, claimed by right, protected by power, and anyone who thinks they can take her from me is welcome to try. The challenge in his words was unmistakable. Victor's face had gone pale, but he was trapped now. Backing down would mean admitting defeat in front of the entire territory. Pressing forward would mean facing the wrath of the most dangerous predator in the northern lands. The documentation clearly shows, Victor began. The documentation, Kieran interrupted, is forged, poorly forged in fact. My legal team has already confirmed it. But even if it weren't, even if you had legitimate claim to Eleanor, which you don't, it wouldn't matter, because she is mine now, by choice, by bond, by right, and I protect what's mine. He took a step toward Victor, and Elena saw the moment the other man realized exactly how much trouble he was in. Kieran's human facade was slipping, revealing glimpses of the wolf beneath. His eyes were pure gold now, and the air around him seemed to shimmer with barely contained power. You want to know what Elena is worth? Kieran asked, his voice carrying a promise of violence that made even Elena's pulse quicken. She's worth more than your life. She's worth more than the lives of everyone who helped you scheme against her. She's worth burning this entire territory to the ground if that's what it takes to keep her safe. Victor's hired muscle was backing away now, clearly recognizing that they were outmatched. But Victor himself seemed frozen, caught between pride and self-preservation. You can't possibly want damaged goods, he tried one last time. She's been used, broken, made worthless by... Victor never got to finish the sentence. Kieran moved so fast that Eleanor's human eyes couldn't track the motion. One moment he was standing 10 feet away. The next he had Victor by the throat, lifted clear off the ground. The crack of bone was audible across the square as Kieran's fingers tightened. The next person who calls her damaged, Kieran said conversationally, loses their tongue. The person after that loses their head. Are we clear? Silence fell across the square like a physical weight. Victor was making choking sounds, his feet kicking uselessly in the air. Elena found herself transfixed by the casual display of deadly power, by the way Kieran could end a life as easily as swatting a fly. She should have been horrified, should have been disgusted by the violence. Instead, she felt protected, cherished, claimed in the most primal way possible. Kieran held Victor aloft for another few seconds, then released him. The man dropped to the ground in a heap, gasping and clutching his throat. He'd live, but barely, and he'd never forget the feeling of an Alpha King's hands around his neck. Take your men and leave my territory, Kieran said quietly. If I see you again, if you so much as whisper Elena's name in your sleep, I'll finish what I started here today. And Victor? He leaned down, bringing his face level with the cowering man. I won't be quick about it. Victor scrambled to his feet, his associates already helping him toward the edge of the square. They'd be gone within the hour, Elena knew. Men like Victor only understood strength, and Kieran had just demonstrated exactly how outmatched they were. The crowd began to disperse, conversations breaking out in hushed whispers about what they'd just witnessed. But Elena only had eyes for Kieran as he crossed the square toward her, his golden gaze fixed on her face. When he reached her, he didn't speak immediately. Instead, his hands framed her face with infinite gentleness, the same hands that had nearly killed a man moments before, now touching her like she was made of spun glass. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. Elena stared up at him, this dangerous, powerful man who'd just claimed her in front of hundreds of witnesses, who'd defended her honour when she thought she had none left to defend. "You called me your mate," she whispered. Kieran's thumb brushed across her cheekbone. "I called you what you are," he said simply. "What you've been since the moment I first saw you. The question is whether you're ready to accept it." Eleanor thought about Victor's words, about the ugly truths he'd revealed and the judgments of strangers. She thought about the life she'd had before Kieran, constant fear, endless struggle, the certainty that she was worth less than nothing. Then she thought about the way Kieran looked at her, like she was precious, like she was everything. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, I accept it. I accept you. I accept us." Kieran's smile was devastating, full of triumph and possession, and something that looked dangerously like love. "Then let's go home," he said, and kissed her forehead with reverent tenderness. "My mate." As they walked back toward the carriage together, Eleanor felt something shift inside her chest. The bond between them, which had been growing stronger each day, suddenly snapped fully into place. She could feel Kieran's emotions as clearly as her own, his fierce protectiveness, his deep satisfaction at having claimed her publicly, his love. Love. He loved her. The broken, damaged girl from the outer districts was loved by the Alpha King. For the first time in her life, Eleanor understood what it meant to belong somewhere, to someone. She was home. The weeks that followed the confrontation in the town square were like living in a dream Eleanor was afraid she might wake up from. The mate bond had changed everything. Where before there had been a tentative warmth between them, now there was something deeper, more fundamental. Elena could feel Kieran's presence even when he was rooms away, could sense his emotions like distant music at the edge of her consciousness. When he was angry about some political matter, her chest would tighten in sympathy. When he was pleased about good news from the outer territories, warmth would bloom behind her sternum for no reason she could name. It should have been overwhelming, but instead it felt like coming home to herself. Kieran, for his part, seemed to understand that Eleanor needed time to process what had happened in the square. He didn't press for more than she was ready to give, didn't demand declarations or commitments beyond what she'd already offered. Instead, he simply was, present, patient, steady as stone. It was the small gestures that slowly began to heal the wounds Victor's words had reopened. The way Kieran brought her tea when he sensed her growing anxious. The way he asked permission before touching her, even though the mate bond gave him certain rights. The way he listened when she talked about her dreams of teaching, not just politely, but with genuine interest and thoughtful questions. "There's a school in the Eastern District that's been looking for a qualified teacher," he mentioned one evening as they sat by the fireplace in his study. Elena curled in the leather chair with her legs tucked under her. "The headmaster is a friend of mine. If you're interested, I could arrange an introduction." Elena looked up from the book she'd been reading, a collection of educational theories that Kieran had somehow acquired for her. "You're serious?" "Completely. Elena, just because you're my mate doesn't mean you have to give up your dreams. If anything, being Luna gives you more power to pursue them." Luna. Elena was still getting used to that title, still struggled to believe it applied to her. "What if I'm not qualified? What if I fail?" Kieran set down the letter he'd been reading and turned to face her fully. "Then you'll try again. Elena, you survived 3 years on the streets with nothing but your wits and determination. Teaching a few children to read isn't going to defeat you." Elena studied his face, searching for any hint of condescension or pity. Instead, she found only confidence, not just in her abilities, but in her right to pursue them. "Tell me about the school," she said finally. The conversation that followed was one of many that slowly began to convince Elena that her new life wasn't too good to be true. Kieran didn't just support her dreams, he actively helped her plan how to achieve them. He talked about establishing literacy programs in the outer districts, about using the Pact's resources to build new schools, about Elena's role in shaping the territory's educational future. It was during one of these discussions, 2 weeks after the confrontation, that Eleanor finally found the courage to tell him everything. They were in the garden, sitting on a stone bench near the fountain where Eleanor had spent so many peaceful afternoons reading. The evening air was warm, filled with the scent of jasmine and roses, and Kieran's presence beside her felt like a shield against all the darkness in the world. "I need to tell you something," Elena said quietly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "About what Victor said in the square, about what happened to me before the auction." Kieran went very still beside her. "Elena, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." Elena forced herself to meet his gaze, even though her heart was racing. "If we're going to be mates, if this is going to work, you need to know who you're bonded to, what I've done, what's been done to me." For a moment, Kieran didn't respond. Then he reached out and took her hands in his touch warm and steady and infinitely patient. "All right," he said simply, "I'm listening." So Eleanor told him everything. About her father's gambling addiction and the debts that had mounted beyond any hope of repayment. About the men who'd come to collect, who'd taken their frustrations out on her when her father wasn't there to face them. About the assault that had left her broken and ashamed, that had resulted in a pregnancy she'd lost in the violence that followed. She told him about the months of survival that had followed, about the choices she'd made to stay alive, about the pieces of herself she'd had to give up along the way. She told him about the auction, about standing on that platform convinced she was worthless, damaged goods that no one could ever truly want. Through it all, Kieran listened without judgment, without pity, without trying to offer empty comfort. His hands never left hers, and the bond between them carried only warmth and acceptance, not the disgust or disappointment Elena had feared. When she finished, silence settled between them like a blanket. Elena stared down at their joined hands, waiting for Kieran to pull away, to realise what he'd really bonded himself to. Instead, he lifted one hand to cup her cheek, guiding her face up until she was looking into his amber eyes. "Elena," he said quietly, "do you know what I see when I look at you?" Elena shook her head, not trusting her voice. "I see someone who survived the unsurvivable. I see someone who protected herself and her child as best she could in an impossible situation. I see someone who endured pain that would have destroyed most people and came out the other side with her capacity for love and trust intact." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, wiping away tears Elena hadn't realised she was shedding. "I see the strongest person I've ever met, and I am honoured to call you mine." "But I'm not pure," Elena whispered. "I'm not innocent or undamaged. I'm—" "Perfect," Kieran interrupted firmly. "You're perfect for me, Elena. Every scar, every wound, every choice you made to survive, it all brought you to that auction house where I could find you, where fate could bring us together. I don't want some untouched innocent who's never faced hardship. I want you, exactly as you are." Elena stared at him, hardly able to process what she was hearing. This man, this powerful, dangerous, magnificent man, wasn't just accepting her past. He was celebrating it as part of what made her who she was. "I love you," she said suddenly, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I know it's too soon. I know I shouldn't—" "Elena." Kieran's smile was brilliant, transforming his face from beautiful to devastating. "I've been in love with you since the moment I saw you. I've just been waiting for you to be ready to hear it." Before Elena could respond, Kieran was kissing her. Not the gentle, careful kisses they'd shared before, but something deeper, more claiming. Elena melted into him, into the warmth and safety and love he offered, feeling the last of her walls crumble to dust. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said simply. "Not just the mate bond, but the human ceremony as well. Be my Luna, my wife, My equal in all things. Eleanor's heart stopped. Kieran, I know it's fast, he said quickly. I know you need time to adjust to everything that's happened, but Elena, I've waited my entire life to find you. I don't want to wait any longer to make it official. Elena thought about the girl she'd been just a few months ago, broken, afraid, convinced she was worth nothing to anyone. That girl would never have believed she could deserve the love of someone like Kieran. But that girl was gone, replaced by someone stronger, someone who understood her own worth. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of preparation. The pack needed to formally accept Elena as their Luna, which required ceremonies and rituals Elena had never imagined. Mrs. Harrison, who had appointed herself Elena's guide through the complex world of pack politics, explained that the lunar acceptance ceremony was both celebration and test, a chance for pack members to see their future queen and for Elena to prove she was worthy of the position. You don't need to prove anything to anyone, Kieran told her the night before the ceremony as they walked through the moonlit gardens. You're already my mate. The pack will accept you because I've chosen you. But they should accept me because I've earned it, Elena replied, surprising herself with the confidence in her voice. Because I'm capable of being the Luna they need, not just because you want me. Kieran stopped walking and turned to face her, his eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. When did you become so wise? When I stopped believing I was worthless, Elena said simply, when I started listening to what you see in me instead of what I'd been told about myself. The ceremony took place in the great hall of the estate, with representatives from every pack in the territory present to witness. Elena wore a dress that had belonged to Kieran's mother, deep blue silk that made her eyes look like sapphires and fit her perfectly, despite having been made decades earlier. The ritual itself was both ancient and beautiful. Elena knelt before the assembled packs while Kieran spoke the formal words of claiming, his voice carrying the power of his position and his love for her. When he placed the lunar circlet on her head, a delicate band of silver and moonstone that had been passed down through generations, Elena felt something shift inside her chest. She was no longer just Elena, the broken girl from the outer districts. She was Elena Thorne, Luna of the Northern Territory, mate to the Alpha King, and for the first time in her life she truly believed she deserved every bit of happiness fate had given her. The pack's acceptance was unanimous. One by one the pack leaders approached to offer their loyalty and welcome Eleanor into their community. She saw respect in their eyes, not pity or judgment, and realized that Kieran had been right. They accepted her not just because he'd chosen her, but because they could see the strength in her that he'd always recognized. Later, after the formal ceremonies were complete and the guests had returned to their own territories, Elena and Kieran stood alone in their bedroom. Their bedroom, Elena was still getting used to that, holding each other in the quiet darkness. "Any regrets?" Kieran asked softly, his lips brushing against her temple. Elena thought about the question seriously. 3 months ago she'd been sleeping in alleys and stealing food to survive. Now she was Luna of the most powerful pack in the territory, married to a man who loved her enough to fight the world for her. "Only one," she said finally. Kieran tensed. "What?" Elena smiled up at him, feeling more certain of herself than she ever had before. "I regret that it took me so long to believe I deserved this, deserved you, deserved love." "Elena," Kieran breathed, and kissed her with a reverence that made her feel like the most precious thing in the world. As they held each other in the darkness, Elena felt the mate bond humming between them like music, connecting them in ways that went beyond the physical. She could feel Kieran's love, his pride in her, his absolute certainty that they belonged together. For the first time in her life, Eleanor knew what it meant to be truly home, not in a place, but with a person who saw her worth even when she couldn't see it herself. She was exactly where she belonged. 6 months later, Elena woke before dawn in the massive bed she now shared with her husband. the soft light of early morning filtering through the curtains like spun gold. Kieran's arm was wrapped around her waist, his breathing deep and even against her neck, and for a moment she simply lay there savouring the profound peace of knowing she was exactly where she belonged. The woman who had stood on an auction platform in terror and shame was gone, replaced by someone Elena was still learning to recognise, someone confident, capable, loved. Luna Elena Thorne, wife to the Alpha King, leader in her own right, teacher to children who had never dared dream of education before meeting her. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. There had been difficult days, moments when the old fears crept back in, times when Elena caught herself waiting for this new life to be revealed as an elaborate dream. But each morning she woke up safe. Each day she spent working alongside Kieran to improve their territory. Each night she fell asleep in his arms. The reality became more solid, more unshakable. Today was one of her favourite kinds of days. No formal pack business, no ceremonies or political meetings. Just her and Kieran, working together on the projects that had become their shared passion. "Good morning, my love," Kieran murmured against her shoulder, his voice rough with sleep. Even half awake, he seemed to sense when her thoughts turned contemplative. The mate bond between them had deepened into something extraordinary, a connection that allowed them to support each other without words, to share strength and comfort with nothing more than a touch. "Good morning," Elena replied, turning in his arms so she could see his face. His dark hair was mussed from sleep, his amber eyes still soft with the remnants of dreams, and she felt the familiar flutter in her chest that came from loving someone so completely and being loved in return. They had developed their own morning routine over the months, slow kisses and quiet conversation, planning their day while wrapped in each other's warmth. It was domestic and peaceful, and everything Elena had never dared hope for during those long years of simply surviving. "Sarah arrives today," Elena said, referring to the young woman they'd rescued from a situation remarkably similar to Elena's own. Word had spread through the underground networks that the Luna of the Northern Territory had once stood where they stood now, that she understood their fear and shame and hopelessness. Women began reaching out, sometimes through official channels, sometimes through desperate letters smuggled to the estate by allies who knew Elena would help. Sarah was the 5th woman they'd brought to safety in the past 3 months. Each one was different circumstances, different traumas, different needs. But Elena saw something of herself in all of them. The way they flinched from unexpected sounds, the way they apologized for taking up space, the way they couldn't quite believe that safety could be real. "Are you nervous?" Kieran asked, running his fingers through Eleanor's hair in the gentle way that never failed to soothe her. "A little," Elena admitted. "She's so young, Kieran, barely 18, and the things they did to her." Elena's voice trailed off as anger tightened in her chest. Even now, months into her role as Luna, she struggled to contain her fury at the people who hurt the innocent. "She's not alone anymore," Kieran said firmly. "Just like you weren't alone the moment I found you. Sarah will heal because she has you to show her it's possible." Elena nodded, drawing strength from his certainty. It still amazed her sometimes how naturally this part of her lunar duties had come to her. She'd expected to feel inadequate, unprepared for the responsibility of helping other women rebuild their lives. Instead, she'd discovered a deep well of purpose she'd never known existed. "The schoolhouse construction should be finished by next week," Kieran said, shifting to a topic that always brought light to Elena's eyes. "The Eastern District children will have their own classroom by winter." Elena's smile was radiant. The school was her project, funded by PAC resources but designed and implemented entirely under her direction. It was the first of several she hoped to establish throughout the territory, part of a larger vision she and Kieran shared of improving education and opportunities for the most vulnerable members of their community. "Mrs. Patterson sent word that 15 children have enrolled so far," Elena said, unable to hide her excitement. 15 children who will learn to read and write and dream of futures beyond mere survival. 15 children who will grow up knowing that knowledge is power, Kieran agreed, his pride in her accomplishments clear in his voice. Their Luna made sure of that. Their Luna. Even after all this time, the title still sent a thrill through Eleanor. Not because of the power it represented, but because of what it meant. That she had found her place, her purpose, her way of making the world a little better than it had been. They rose and dressed together, moving through their morning routine with the easy familiarity of mates who knew each other's rhythms completely. Kieran had meetings with the Western Pack leaders about territorial boundaries, while Elena had planned to spend the morning preparing for Sarah's arrival and reviewing applications for the teacher position at the new school. As they walked downstairs together, Kieran caught her hand and brought it to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her palm. "Have I told you lately that you're extraordinary?" he asked, his amber eyes warm with love and admiration. "Only every day," Elena replied, but her cheeks still flushed with pleasure. She would never get tired of hearing it, would never stop being amazed that someone like Kieran could see such value in someone who had once believed herself worthless. "Good," Kieran said simply, "because it's true." The morning passed in a blur of productive activity. Elena met with Mrs. Harrison to review the preparations for Sarah's arrival, ensuring that the yellow suite was ready and that Dr. Chen would be available if needed. She spoke with the head cook about special dietary considerations. Many of the women they rescued arrived severely malnourished, and confirmed that the estate security team understood to give Sarah space and time to adjust. It was work that felt deeply meaningful, using her own experience to help others navigate the difficult path from victim to survivor to something more. Elena had discovered that her past, rather than being a source of shame, had become one of her greatest strengths as Luna. She understood fear and trauma in ways that allowed her to connect with people others might struggle to reach. Shortly after lunch, a carriage arrived at the main gates, and Elena felt her heart clench with familiar emotion as she watched a slight figure in worn clothing step uncertainly onto the gravel drive. Sarah was small and pale, with the hunched posture of someone accustomed to making herself invisible. Her clothes hung loose on her thin frame, and her eyes darted constantly, searching for threats. Elena remembered that feeling, the hypervigilance that came from never knowing when the next blow would fall. "Sarah," Elena said gently, approaching slowly with her hands visible and her voice calm. "Welcome. My name is Elena. I'm so glad you're here." The girl, and she was barely more than that, looked up with wide, frightened eyes. Elena could see the exact moment Sarah registered who she was talking to, could see the disbelief and desperate hope that warred across her features. "You're really her," Sarah whispered, "the Luna who was like me." "I was like you," Elena confirmed gently. "And now I'm someone who gets to help you become who you're meant to be. Would you like to see your room? Mrs. Harrison has prepared something special for you." Over the next few hours, Eleanor watched Sarah begin the same journey she herself had taken. The wonder at the luxury of the estate, the disbelief that such kindness could be real, the gradual relaxation as safety started to feel possible. Elena stayed close, but not hovering, offering comfort without overwhelming, remembering how important it had been to feel like she had choices. "Why?" Sarah asked during dinner, her voice small and confused. "Why would the Alpha King help someone like me?" Eleanor exchanged a look with Kieran, who had joined them for the meal but remained quietly supportive, letting Elena take the lead. "Because someone like you has value," Elena said firmly. "Because everyone deserves safety and the chance to heal. Because you matter, Sarah, even if no one has shown you that before now." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, and Eleanor reached across the table to squeeze her hand gently. "I know it's hard to believe right now. I didn't believe it either when I first arrived. But you'll see. You'll heal, and you'll grow, and one day you'll help someone else the way we're helping you. That's how it works." Later that evening, after Sarah had been settled in her room, with books and soft clothing, and the promise that no one would disturb her unless she asked for help, Elena and Kieran sat together in their private sitting room, planning and dreaming about the future. The council approved the expansion proposal, Kieran said, referring to their plan to extend pack protection to several unclaimed territories where women like Sarah were most vulnerable. We can officially begin establishing outposts within the month. Elena felt a surge of satisfaction. The expansion would mean more resources needed, more complex logistics, more responsibility for both of them. But it would also mean more people safe, more children in school, more families protected from the kind of predators who had once controlled Elena's life. "I've been thinking," Elena said, curling against Kieran's side as she had learned to do without fear or hesitation, "about what comes next, after we establish the outposts, after we build the schools." "What comes next?" Kieran prompted, his arm tightening around her in the way that always made Eleanor feel cherished. Elena smiled, thinking about the conversation they'd been having more frequently lately, about the family they wanted to build together. "Cubs," she said simply, "little ones who grow up knowing they're loved and safe and capable of anything they dream." Kieran's breath caught, and when Elena looked up at him, she saw such profound love in his amber eyes that it took her breath away. "Elena Thorne," he said softly, "you continue to amaze me every single day." "Good," Elena replied, echoing his words from the morning, "because I intend to keep amazing you for the rest of our very long lives." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts about the future they were building together. Elena thought about the woman she had become, about the responsibilities she had embraced, about the love that surrounded her daily. 6 months ago, she had been nothing and no one. A broken girl with no hope for anything beyond basic survival. Now she was Luna Elena Thorne, wife to the Alpha King, protector of the vulnerable, teacher and leader, and someone who mattered. More than that, she was someone who knew her own worth, who understood that her value didn't come from what others said about her, but from who she chose to be. "Do you ever think about it?" Kieran asked quietly. "How different things might have been if I hadn't walked into that auction house that night?" Elena considered the question seriously. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But then I remember that you did walk in, that somehow, despite everything that went wrong in my life before, fate still managed to bring me exactly where I needed to be." "Where we both needed to be," Kieran corrected, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I was searching for something for so long, Elena. I just didn't know it was you until I saw you." Elena turned in his arms so she could look at him directly, marvelling again at the fact that this magnificent, powerful man was hers completely. "Promise me something," she said. "Anything. Promise me that no matter how far our territory expands, no matter how many people we help or how complicated our lives become, we'll always remember this feeling, this certainty that we belong together." Kieran's smile was brilliant, the expression of a man who had everything he'd ever wanted and knew it. "Eleanor, my love, my mate, my queen, I promise you that even when we're old and grey and surrounded by grandchildren who think we're impossibly ancient, I will still look at you and see the extraordinary woman who stole my heart the moment I laid eyes on her." Elena kissed him then, pouring all her love and gratitude and hope for their future into the contact. When they broke apart, she felt that familiar warmth spreading through her chest, not the desperate heat of new attraction, but the steady, unshakable warmth of true love and perfect partnership. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "And I love you," Kieran replied. "Forever and always, in every life we might live, I will find you and love you and keep you safe." As they held each other in the lamplight, Eleanor thought about how far she had come, about the woman she had become, about the future that stretched ahead of them full of possibility and purpose. She was exactly where she belonged, with the person who saw her worth even when she couldn't see it herself. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new people to help, new dreams to pursue. But tonight, Elena Thorne was simply home. Wherever you are in this beautiful world, wherever your own journey has taken you, remember that your story is still being written. That love can find you in the most impossible places, that healing is possible even from the deepest wounds, that you are worthy of every good thing life has to offer. And if you enjoyed Elena and Kieran's story, there are so many more waiting to be discovered. Subscribe to our channel to follow along as more hearts find their way home, because everyone deserves a love story as epic as theirs.